live in San Francisco, and I come from AC Lyric. What? Oh, whatever. Until what? Oh yeah, and what was your first job? Sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Anyway, I'm Mario, and I come from San Francisco. My first job was Starbucks, and now I work at Lyric.
My name is Sarah. I'm from Career Network for Change at UNCCH Chapel Hill, and my first job was working at Michael's Arts and Crafts cashier.
My name is Nadia, and I'm from Portland, Oregon, with Love Makes a Family, and my first job was selling around paper in elementary school. My name is Sarah, and I'm from Portland, Oregon, and my first job was
for your issue or your candidate or your organization. So what we're going to do is just have them share some of their experiences that lean more towards the negatives, the things that have not worked when they've had stories pitched to them. Go into some of the tools and tactics that you can use. We're not going to go page by page through this. I wanted to provide you more information than we could go over in an hour and a half so that you can take this back and you can go through the nuts and bolts of how to write a press release if you don't already have that experience. There's a couple articles or some sample news releases in there that you can check out later. And then after we go through some of those nuts and bolts, the importance of having a media plan, then what I'd like to do is break into small groups. If there's some of you who are from the same organization or who work together, and we've got our three journalists here, we've got at least two folks who are in the audience who are members of the Atlanta chapter of the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association. And they've offered to come and work with you and observe what that process is like and get feedback from the panel, practical and as useful as possible for all of you. So we can get a sense of the room. Can we just have a show of hands if you work with an organization or just on your own, but you've never had any experience whatsoever pitching a story to the media? By that I mean a news release, a phone call, an interview. If you've never done any of that, raise your hand. Okay. If you've had a little bit of experience doing that, but you wouldn't, qualify yourself as someone who's highly accustomed to doing that, it's something that you've kind of done on the side because it needed done and no one else was raising their hand. Why don't you raise your hand now? Okay. And if you really should be up here leading this, or you've had a lot of experience and you're here to really help contribute your experiences to how all of us can make our pitches better, raise your hand. Okay. Great. Just for the sake of introductions, Holly, why don't we start with you, and then the other folks in the room who are members of the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, if you could introduce yourselves.
I'm Holly Crenshaw. I work at the Atlanta.
Select who gets to go first. Who's got dibs on going last? And share an experience that wasn't as effective as maybe it could have been.
My name is Jen Christensen. I'm an investigative producer with WSOC, which is the ABC affiliate in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was the president of the NLGJA chapter in Kentucky. I just moved.
I'm Jay Croft. I'm an online editor of AJC.com, which is the online version of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Been doing that since January of this year, and before that I was a reporter for a long time, including 3 years on the Metro desk of the Journal-Constitution. And once every week or two I write a column on our website on gay issues. And I'm Chris Crane. I'm the editor of Southern Voice newspaper, which I encourage you all to pick up at the newsstand downstairs on the 8th floor, or upstairs. It's Atlanta's gay and lesbian newspaper. Until this summer, it was Atlanta's gay and lesbian newspaper. We expanded to cover the rest of the South in July. So now we cover everything from Atlanta to New Orleans. And we're part of a company called Wyndham Media, which also owns the Houston Voice, which is Houston's gay and lesbian newspaper. And I've been doing that for about 3 years. And was a lawyer for a long time, the intervening years, but before that was a reporter for Tennessee, which is Nashville, Tennessee's morning daily newspaper.
I should say, just as a program note, Doug Hamilton with the AJC had originally volunteered
was sent out the night before a morning event. It's fax. You can do a little timestamp. Obviously, we're not going to go to that. One of them doesn't have the date. One of them is 3 pages long and never tells you what it is. It's some kind of thing at a theater company, but it never comes out and says it's a play, it's a poetry night. I have no idea. You read this for three pages, and you have no idea what it is. 3 pages brings up another point. No one's going to read 3 pages. So you can do one. And I guess that might be a good place to start with just the real basics. Don't assume that we know who you are or that we've heard of your organization or that we know what that event is. Make it very clear, make it very easy, and give us a name and a phone number. Go ahead.
I also brought some press releases too, and I'll just go with the ugly one. They had a great idea, and it was they were going to China to bring back some children for some local families, but included a phone number that was wrong. So I could never get in contact with these people, even though I really would have loved to have covered their story. They also never said when this was happening or where this was happening. I'm always amazed, too, that this is entitled Dear Sir, but it's addressed to me. So I didn't appreciate that. So we tried to cover it, but we couldn't cover it because there wasn't enough information on that. I also run a hotline called Whistleblower 9, and it's for people who see government corruption and all of that. And sometimes they'll call and insult us, which is never a good way to get us to come and cover you, because they'll call us stupid and all sorts of other names. And generally that makes us just send them on general voicemail to everyone so we can all hear, oh, listen how funny our public can be. But for the most part, these are exceptions, rare exceptions to the rule who talks to us.
Because I'm with the gay press, when it comes to, I'll talk about how you should approach the gay press. If you've got a gay-related event and you're approaching the gay press, it should be like a bar at last call. It should be really easy for you to get what you want. But it's not always easy. In theory, it would be easy because you'd think they'd be very interested in what you're doing, because what you're doing is gay-related and they're a gay-oriented media outlet. But the reason it's not always easy is you may be asking them to cover an event they've covered so many times that they don't know a new way to do it. If you're calling about some pride-related organizational meeting and you want a story about that, you don't want to just listen to the community counter, you want a story about it, they're going to sit in their budget meeting, which is when they decide what stories to assign, and say, well, how are we going to do that in a way that's new and interesting or that people are actually going to read? So what your job is, if you want something more than a calendar mention, or if you want something more than a blurb, is to come up with a new way of pitching the story. If this is an organizational meeting that is about fundraising, get someone who's given money in the past who ended up getting a lot out of it to give their name and contact information as part of the press release or part of the story pitch phone call you make, and say, I've got someone who's got a really interesting story to tell about how they gave money to Pride and as a result got a lot out of it. It's just the top of my head, so it's not necessarily a great example. But whatever your event is, find a personal story you can tell related to that event. Do the reporter's work for them. I mean, the more work you do for a reporter, the more likely your story gets done. It may seem like the reporter should be, fulfilling his or her responsibility and being willing to get out there and figure out what your story is and figure out the best way to cover it. And sometimes that does happen. But if you really want your event covered, and that ultimately is the goal, then make the reporter's job easy. Think of ways to you've got the interview contact's name and phone number, you've got when they're available, you can tell them that you're more than happy to set up a photo for them. I mean, everything you can think to do that makes the reporter's job easier, your story is more likely to get covered. And try to think of new ways to pitch a story, if it is a story that the newspaper has done in the past, so that they're likely to see a more interesting angle to it than they would normally see for just another, it's the AIDS Walk again. Well, what new can we say about this year's AIDS Walk? You could say Atlanta's AIDS Walk continues to raise more money while AIDS Walks around the country are raising less and less money every year. Why is that? I mean, give a reporter an interesting angle to cover, and you've greatly increased your odds you're going to get your story covered.
Right, and that's not just with the gay press, and absolutely with us. Give us the context and do a little of the work for us so that we can see what the news is, because a lot of these things, a gay story is not necessarily a story anymore. Maybe it was 10 years ago, it's not anymore. So you need to be on top of the context of your event.
And for television, too, think visually. I can't begin to tell you how few press conferences will cover unless it's something that the president is giving, or something that somebody, something very big has happened to them. And while it may seem very big to you, if you have, a good example, in Indianapolis, the NOW chapter did a same-sex marriage protest. And what was wonderful about it was it was Valentine's Day, so it was timely. It was topical because it was a same-gender marriage. And then it was visual because people camped it up and they dressed in wedding dresses. So you had, I think it was a dozen women in all various kinds of wedding dresses, and they tried to register 2 women to get married at the City Hall. And it was the best TV I think I've seen in a very long time, because it was visual. Yeah. You saw the clerk feeling bad that they couldn't, give these people permission to marry. And then you had substance too, because then everyone else, talked to these folks and said, why are you doing this? What's interesting about this? And sure enough, it led the newscast. So, if you think about something and have a sense of humor too, even on very serious issues, sometimes, television will be more than likely to come and cover it.
Well, that's why ACT UP got 10 times, 100 times the publicity than its membership, not the size of its membership would have dictated, because they were constantly dreaming up really creative ways to do their protests that the media just ate up. And it doesn't have to be a protest. It can be just something you're doing organizationally, but if the more creative and visual you can be for every kind of media, I think it definitely benefits you.
And can I say one more thing? Or without even without something as exciting and dynamic as ACT UP used to be, or the story that Jen was just describing, I want to. Jen gave such a good example, but on a more basic level, some of the I wanted to read from a good press release that we got, just to show you what's going to catch people's eye when you're doing more, ordinary things than some of the stuff that we've been talking about. This was a notice that went out. It was sent to the attention of the food, health, and calendar editors, which brings up a point that you should know who you're sending your stuff to. Don't send it to editor, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Find out who the beat reporter is, or who the specific editor is, who would be more likely to do that. And if you're not sure, send it to 2 or 3 of them, and put on the top of it that you're sending it to all 3 of them. It's got a date, it's got a contact, it's got a phone number. The headline is Renowned Chef Celebrates National Meat Out with Georgia Veggie Society. Describes this renowned chef. This event has all the basics, everything you want to know about this. It's all on one page, and at the end it backs it up. It says why this chef is so renowned and who's written about him and some awards that he's won, so that you know that there's credibility with it. And that's real simple. It's not terribly sexy, but it is effective, and a good example of, if you're doing something kind of like this, well, how do I get my little event noticed? That's one way.
One more positive, negative thing which follows the coverage. You want to build a relationship with the media. You want it to be not just a one-time, you pitch a story, they ran it, and they don't hear from you. It's human nature that if someone calls up and thanks someone for a story, it's gonna do you some good with that person. Or even if you're unhappy with the story, calling up and saying the parts you were happy with and then raising your criticism. It's just human nature. And find something positive to say, even if there were aspects of the story that you really weren't happy with. And try and phrase, like you would in any human dynamic, try and phrase your criticism in a constructive way that says, in the future, don't use the term homosexual to describe us, use the term gay, or whatever it is that your complaint is. Try and make it as constructive as possible.
That keeping up that, making the context, knowing who you're dealing with, and maintaining a relationship is key. When I was a reporter, most of the time here in Atlanta, I covered the court system. And I'd get a lot of press releases from people I knew or had developed relationships with at the Human Rights Campaign and the National Lesbian and Gay Task Force. And these are people that I talked to over the years, knew each other well, in a work relationship, not socially. And I'd get faxes and press releases from them on cases in Florida, court cases in Alabama, things that I'm not going to write about as the, Atlanta courts reporter. But they kept them coming, and maybe one out of every 6 or 7 I'd want to use. And that kept the relationship going so that when I needed them once or twice a year to help me put into context some lawsuit here or the insurance commissioner refusing to give domestic partner benefits or whatever, I had that relationship and then could go to them when I needed them, and I knew who to go to at the national gay rights groups for that. So even if every time you send something to a reporter or you make a call, we don't take you up on it, it doesn't mean that you're not establishing some rapport that will be of use later to one or both of you.
I was going to say, how would you have felt about that if these groups were sending you things that didn't fall under the category of the general topic that you covered?
You mean that I was a court reporter and they were sending me stories on education issues or something? Mm-hmm. Then I would have called them up or written them back and said, I cover courts and can't help you with this. Here's the name and phone number of our courts reporter. Of our education reporter. I suggest you contact her. And try to steer them to the right person.
Sending you stuff that was irrelevant to what you covered.
Yeah, that gets a little annoying. Don't do that. Don't blanket us. Don't send. Well, I'll send something to every reporter at the Journal-Constitution. Don't. You're wasting your time and ours. Find out who the right person is and focus on that person.
The other great thing about building a relationship, especially with a reporter in the mainstream press, is you'll be someone they'll call, even in a totally unrelated gay story, to find people. Mm-hmm. You would be amazed the number of phone calls Southern Voice and other gay newspapers mm-hmm. get every week from TV and print and all national journalists, local journalists, who say, we need 2 old gay people who are in a relationship together. And they're basically wanting us to do their job for them, which we're even less inclined to do than someone who is just in the general public. But if you are a gay person who has a relationship with a reporter at a mainstream news outlet, you can really help the cause by being available and having a list of contacts, being in touch with GLAAD or other groups that might have a greater list of contacts than you do, and then following through when you do get that phone call. CNN's Talk Back Live has about a list of 4 or 5 local gay activists here. Anytime they have anything gay related on that show, they call them and they get 20 people to show up on the audience. And if you ever watch that show and wonder why when they do something gay related there happen to be all these gay people in the crowd, it's because they have this list of 5 gay people. And so if you want to be on that list and can get on that list, you can. I mean, those 5 people are affecting a news show that's seeing internationally. So it has an impact.
And one way to get in touch with journalists too, because sometimes we're not all that approachable, is most cities have a National Lesbian Gay Journalists Association chapter. If you can make friends with those folks, I will guarantee those folks will be able to help you out. I mean, we can't, as journalists, advocate for particular gay stories based on the politics necessarily, but we are approachable and we are people who can get you in contact with other folks. So if you want to check out their website, it'll show you which cities have chapters in your own area, and you can make contact with those folks. Send them an email, say, hey, I'm out here, and just let them know.
And that web address is?
I think it's just nlgja.org.
Yeah.
.com is a totally different
It's a
thing.
porn site,
I fell into
but-
it once and it was a porn site. I thought, huh.
Really?
Is it really?
Yes.
Wow.
That's .org.
funny.
Repeat that again.
Yeah, please repeat it again.
nlgja.org.
.com, Woody.
And one other thing too, since I do investigative work, if you have a story about discrimination or that's terrible wrongdoing, one thing that I recommend to people who do call is that they have documentation. Whatever happens, if you can have something backing you up on paper, I am so much more likely to carry it in our newscasts than anything else. We need to protect ourselves legally in sensitive areas. So anytime something happens, please suggest that if somebody calls you or whatever, write it down, date it, and make sure you have that documentation in a nice, orderly fashion so when the reporter talks to you, you can say, look what I have. they'll love you for it, really.
Part of getting to where you can actually have the kind of conversations and interactions that Chris and Jen and Jay have talked about is doing your homework. Even before you get to the point of trying to make the phone call or who should I send an email to or things like that, we need to back it up a little bit further and make sure that we've got the type of information that they need. As Jen said, if you're going to be talking about someone experiencing discrimination or being a victim of a perceived hate crime or things of that nature, you've got to have those hard, cold facts. And there's a list of the type of things that you'd need under your media materials. It may or may not be a news release, depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But you do need some type of information about, whether it's a pitch letter or a news release, and then the information about the particular incident that you're calling about or the particular event that you're calling about. Think about the purpose of what it is that you're doing. If you're having an event, such as the one that took place at Centennial Park today, calling for allowing the folks in Florida to be able to vote, whatever that exactly means, I'm not sure, but that was an event that was for that purpose. So the purpose of the news release then would be to get reporters to come down to the event. And so hopefully they were also provided some background information on why such an event was needed. Let's say this was an event to talk about changing the Georgia flag. That was something that some of you may have attended a couple days ago or yesterday, I guess it was, which did get at least some television coverage.
It was in the paper.
Was it? Okay. I haven't read today's paper.
NPR covered it as
Yesterday's.
well.
And NPR covered it, so it got some good coverage. And there's several reasons why. Part of it being that the folks who were covering knew what the heck, all the hubbub about changing the Georgia flag was. Part of it, I think, is because it's tied to a larger issue, a national issue. We saw what happened in South Carolina, so it has that kind of relevance. But if it were something about, we need to pass employment non-discrimination legislation. Believe it or not everybody in America realizes that you can get fired from your job just for being gay, lesbian, bi, or transgender. So we need to provide them, as journalists, that background information. It's great if we've got some statistics as to something that's happened, in your locale, in your community. It's even better if you've got someone who's not the head of an organization, who's not the talking head, quote unquote, who can stand up and say, I was at such and such a job and I got fired and it was because I was gay or lesbian. That kind of stuff I would think would pretty much, it would get you some coverage. It's great to have a talking head, someone who can give an organizational point of view, but someone who's experienced whatever it is that you're talking about, that's even better. And so before you even make the call or send the email, have all of that information together. Know who's going to talk, who's going to be the official spokesperson, so to speak, who's going to be your contact person with the media to make sure they know the who, what, when, where, why, how, and how much. And make sure you've got your folks who can provide testimony, who aren't just representing an organization, and provide the facts as well. Typically, and perhaps before the age of email, we used to do these great media kits, and sometimes we still do. If it's a general issue, not something that's got a particular deadline, or it's an identity, an organization that you want to start developing some relationships for, put it in just a simple pocket folder, all that kind of information. Biography of key folks within the organization who want to come and talk with the editorial board or talk with a particular reporter. Make sure that the people that you're selecting, however, can address the issue in the way that you want it addressed. For example, if you're going to be talking to a faith and values editor at a particular newspaper, it'd be really great to have a minister or two talking about the issue of gender identity and sexual orientation. It's great if you have an organizational person. It's great if you just have a regular person too. But if you've got someone who has a particular point of view that connects with the reporter's particular beat or area that they're trying to coverage, that's where that relationship is going to be built. So make sure you do your homework by first of all determining why is it that we want coverage. Because there are times when media coverage is not what you want or what you should pursue. You should do an advertisement. You should buy, if there's, a particular concert or something that you're promoting, it's really not going to be a stretch unless you've got some kind of big celebrity or a big hook to tie it to a news story to to make it newsworthy to the majority of the readers or the viewers, buy an ad. You know, save your chits, so to speak, with your reporters, you know, to cash in on something that really is going to be newsworthy, where you can show that hook. You know, and so know when it's time to, you know, make the calls, to try to get news coverage, and know when it's time to write the check and to buy some ads in that particular newspaper, or if you've got the budget, on television. Also know when it's time to simply do a public service announcement, a PSA. It might not run until 2 o'clock in the morning on television, but, you know, some people are watching those. You know, and from what I understand, televisions are required to provide a certain amount of those. What that is like a free announcement, saying that there's going to be such and such a rally on such and such a day at such and such a place for such and such a cause. It's a way of getting it in there. And what it costs you would be the time. You know, if you're paying someone to make those kind of calls or to draft up and fax or email the announcements, that's what it will cost you. But it's worth it. And then when you're looking at your media relations, don't depend only on trying to get a news story. Write a letter to the editor. Write an op-ed piece. If you've got someone within your community who's an expert on, I don't know, child development, or who's a teacher, or a former teacher, or a minister who can talk about how violence in high schools has a particular impact on those youth who are struggling with their sexual orientation, write the op-ed piece for them if need be, but get them to sign off on it. Get them to use their expertise and their credentials and their authority.
All the different things that you've got available to you through the media in order to do that. And then the other thing is, when you can do a news release or media advisory, there's some definitions and some suggestions on when you might show that teenagers who are gay or lesbian or questioning their sexual orientation tend to be at a much higher risk for suicide than teenagers who aren't. Why don't we do a feature story on this? Why don't we examine this issue more in depth and demonstrate to them how it is connected to what's happening in the community, what's happening nationally? Use that as an opportunity to pitch a more general story. And that I would view as a pitch versus something that would warrant a particular news release. When would y'all, from your perspective, when would you find it more appropriate to have a pitch, a phone call, an email saying, hey, here's a story idea, here's some documentation that backs up why I think it would be interesting to your viewers and readers, and when do you think it's more appropriate to get a news release? Are there certain criteria?
Well, for television, we have a real short attention span. So if you do have an event, we actually encourage people to send a press release and, Holly's going to hate this, and call. Because some people will call just to see if we have a press release. Don't do that. But call and you know, make it sound interesting. I know our assignment editor is exceptionally busy, so if you do call the assignment editor, make it as quick as possible, as concise as possible. Say, I know I sent you this, but you know, here's why I think you should come out and cover this. And you know, if you catch them and if you get them interested, sure enough, they'll ask you more questions. You know, and if they're not interested, just be polite and say, well, thank you, you know, for your time. You know, and generally that will be, at least in television, it seems to work well if you have both.
Yeah, you mean the difference between a press release on a specific event and a more of an enterprise piece?
Yeah, like would you want a press release or something that could be contrived as one to say, here's a story idea? Or would you rather have just a letter or a fax or a phone call on that versus...
Yeah, I wouldn't, I don't know, I think Holly might be able to speak to this better than I, since she deals with these kinds of things more than I do at the newspaper, but I would think that a press release would be more for an event, and a story idea, an enterprise piece, a feature, would be more something that you would want to maybe make a phone call. If you get a voicemail, say, hey, I've got a story idea for you, I'll call you back. Don't say call me back, because it's probably not going to happen. And or send an email now that we have email, and give the context. And what I was looking for when I was reporting, and what I think a lot of people are looking for, when we're talking about a specific case that I can use, a specific instance as real people, and you've done your homework, you've got some documents or something to back up what you're saying, and show me how that illustrates something bigger, because that's what really makes the best stories, I thought, as a reporter and still do as a reader, is something that's specific. This real human being is involved in this thing that is tangible, and it illustrates these other conflicts, these other issues that other people are undergoing. And those are great, because a lot of ideas that people call us with, they'll say, I want you to do a story on my divorce. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. But you don't understand, my ex-wife took the kids, and I never get to see them, and I'm paying child support, and she's doing this. Well, out of that, maybe there's some germ of a story on trends in child custody cases or something. I know this doesn't have anything to do with gay issues, but it doesn't have to. I think, trying to illustrate that a specific case might not be enough to be a story on its own, but it might be enough to open the door to a broader story. And if you can help me as a reporter see that, then that can be a good story. Probably, I'm kind of baffled, but do you know what I mean?
Send me something, fax me something, so I could then take it to someone higher up that showed them.
I want to give two nuts and bolts suggestions to follow up on what Cindy said. One, if you have someone coming to speak, which is a classic story pitch, if someone's coming to speak at your next meeting, one thing Cindy is very good at, which all interesting to the newspaper or whoever the press outlet is, if they can actually talk to the person and get more into the guts of what they're going to talk about rather than just a preview piece that says who they are and gives their bio. The other follow-up is on the op-ed stuff she was talking about. One thing that greatly increases the likelihood, two things that will greatly increase the likelihood of getting a letter to the editor or an op-ed piece published are, one, follow their guidelines. If they say an op-ed piece is 800 words, don't write 1,200 words. Or if you do, don't be surprised when one comes out. Doesn't look much like what you wrote, because they're only going to run 800 words if they say they can only write 800 words. And letter to the editor, if they say 400 words, write 400 words. If you write 1,000 words, the editor's going to, the amount of work it takes for your letter versus letter B, it makes it more like letter B is going to get published rather than yours. The other thing is act quickly. If something is timely in the news, write your letter or write your op-ed piece right away, because the faster you're in the door, the more likely you're going to get published. Because
Some days it's just not going to happen. Some days the interview can be in the can, and there's a presidential non-election, and you can just forget it. You don't exist anymore. If a 7-year-old, goes and shoots up a bunch of people at the Kmart, you don't exist. Your story isn't happening, unless it's something that's equally as gruesome or sensational. And that's like a slight hyperbole, right? Maybe not a hyperbole.
Well, and on that note, too, if you have a big national issue going on, and we are famous for wanting to localize an issue. So if someone's, killed because they're gay or lesbian, and you want to talk about hate crimes, give us a call and say, I have 3 people who would be relevant to this story. If you're looking to localize the story, please talk to me, because otherwise, in the media, we'll call the same 5 people and say, do you know anything about hate crimes? And it actually is helpful if you say, hey, I can help you out, because we are trying to do that.
You'd be amazed the stories you could get covered about issues that are important to gay people if you just do the reporter's job for them.
Yeah.
Even if it has no local angle whatsoever, the story, before it's in your hands, the story has no local angle whatsoever. Let's say the James Dell Boy Scout case, Supreme Court case. I mean, he's in New Jersey and you live in Florida. Except for all the people from New Jersey who moved to Florida, there's really no connection there. But you can get that story, I guarantee you can get that story covered by or a number of local TV and print outlets if you find a Boy Scout who's gay in your area, who's willing to talk, because it's a hot issue and they have a local connection. And even though you have nothing to do with the case whatsoever, you can get that story covered. Or you're going to have a protest outside the United Way office of your local, in your area, because they're continuing to fund the Boy Scouts even though they have policies that say they shouldn't. I mean, find a local angle to, whatever the national, anytime there's a national gay story, immediately go through your head, the Matthew Shepard thing, anytime there's a national gay story, that is an ideal opportunity to get lots of coverage in the mainstream press locally if you find a local connection for them by just a gay person at Emory University who's had trouble being gay would have gotten coverage during the Matthew Shepard thing just because they love the idea of a visual local story that connects with this national story that's way far away in Wyoming.
Yeah, I have a sports writer at the newspaper who's asked me several times over the last few months to help him find a gay high school football player. And you can joke about that all you want. Give you a few seconds to get out your one-liners. But the idea was from I'm forgetting what it was, but there was some big story. Help me out here.
Oh, the guy in Massachusetts.
Yeah, right. And so he thought, gee, this is probably and this is a straight guy, a sports reporter, and he recognized this was a good story, and he wanted to do what Chris was just describing, and so he asked me to suggest a few contacts, and I did, and those didn't pan out for him, and he's asked me again, and I'm kind of at a loss, but so this is an example where it's not working, but where we're trying, we're trying to localize that story because it's a damn good story. It's also indicative of the evolution of gay news, and I know that we're all, like I said before, something that might have qualified as news 10 years ago might not cut it now, so you're always trying to move ahead a little bit. And Cindy said something I just want to make clear too. Well, she made me think of it anyway. Don't take this personally, and don't get hurt or defensive or upset about it if we take a pass, or if we say, gee, I don't know, maybe, or if the reporter doesn't call you back, or if we were scheduled to cover something this week, and then, like Cindy said, this presidential thing happened, and you get blown off the screen. Sorry, this is news. It's going to happen. We're all very busy. We're all very deadline oriented, and it doesn't mean we don't like you. It doesn't mean we don't think that your event is important, or that we're homophobic, or that the mainstream media doesn't want to cover gay issues. I mean, sometimes it means that, of course. Everything's different, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And you're not going to help yourself if you say, oh, well, they won't do this because we're a queer group, or that city editor is a homophobe, or whatever. It's probably not the case. So,
but feel free to call the local gay newspaper
call them and
make that complaint, and we'd be happy to do that story
yeah.
about how the mainstream press won't cover your stories.
Right.
And you'd be surprised, things that don't seem, like, we had an Equality Begins at Home. What did we do? We had a movie, a great gay movie in a big theater downtown, and then we had a candlelight vigil afterwards. And, some people in the group were like, well, I don't know if this would even be newsworthy. Actually it is. It's a relevant topic. It was a different way to celebrate. And people on TV love candlelight vigils. So anytime you can get a candlelight vigil, we're going to be there. So just, don't underestimate what you're doing, too, because it can be definitely newsworthy.
Set realistic expectations based on where you live and what kind of stories are covered. When I was executive director of Stonewall Cincinnati 5 years ago, it was so easy to get media coverage. They thought, my board, God bless them, thought that I just hung the moon, but it was the easiest 2 years of my life for getting media coverage because there were so few people in the southern Ohio, northern Kentucky area who were willing to go on camera and state their name and talk about gay, lesbian, bi, or transgender issues. And so anytime there was anything remotely related to those kind of issues, they would call Stonewall Cincinnati. And because we had done our homework, we had the right folks who knew how to articulate their message clearly based on whether it was housing or employment or lack of domestic partner benefits, anti-gay violence, all those kind of things. But in Cincinnati, we did have to work it. We had to respect the system. We had to, play within those boundaries. And when we did, we usually got great results. Moving to Atlanta is a different conversation because there are so many people who are willing to go on camera that being gay is not newsworthy in and of itself. And so, does that mean that the AJC is more homophobic than the Cincinnati Enquirer? I doubt it. It's probably the opposite. But because the environment's different, it's a different game. It's more difficult to demonstrate the newsworthiness of something that's happening with regard to the gay community just because it's the gay community. And so in a sense, that's progress, but it makes our job that much harder. Jamie?
This goes to what I was talking about Pride earlier.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about?
Okay. Let's see, Pride 98 was a big event at the AJC afterwards. let's see, you know, we have a big Pride celebration here in Atlanta every year. It's probably one of the biggest in the country. About 300,000 people show up. It lasts all weekend. There's a lot of stuff going on. And in 1998, a lot of people in the gay community felt that we at the Journal-Constitution ignored Pride. That's sort of overstating it, but I don't want to, the details aren't necessarily important.
No, it's not.
Huh?
It's not
Okay, well
overstating.
then, fine. He wants to fight about this.
Let's mix it up here.
No, there was some coverage of Pride, perhaps not enough for some people. And so what happened was something really cool. A lot of people complained, called up the newspaper, wrote letters, wrote emails saying, how can you ignore our community? Atlanta is one of the nation's leading gay communities. It's regionally very important as well as nationally. There's zillions of gay people all over the place in Atlanta, and we have this huge event, and you ignore it. And the newspaper's editors went, oh shit, I think you're right. We kind of did blow it on that, didn't we? And yet, so had the Pride organizers, or whoever was behind the publicity for it, hadn't quite gone the extra mile. Kind of assumed that that the newspaper would cover it, maybe. And I don't mean to get specific with them or take them to task, but and I don't really remember all the details, but they didn't make it as easy for us as perhaps they could have. They didn't insist that we cover it, and they didn't give us the new angle. And I remember, I thought the coverage was okay because as a newsman, you know, sorry, but a bunch of gay people marching down Peachtree Street for the 28th year in a row isn't necessarily that big a deal. What's the new angle? What are you going to say about it? Whatever. Well, out of these complaints came some good constructive dialogues. We had a meeting at the CNN Center between journalists and members of the gay activist community and sort of explained our points of view. Holly and I, along with some of the editors at the newspaper, got together and did a plan for when Pride the next year came around so that we would do a better job, both from the community's point of view, but also from ours, because we weren't interested in just having a big puff piece on now the 29th annual Pride event. We wanted to find something new to say about it, and that was our challenge, to set this large, yet by now kind of ordinary and predictable event into some newsworthy context. And so Holly and I came up with this idea that within the perimeter, it's just as gay as it can get. And perimeter is just sort of like the Beltway in Atlanta. It's a highway that circles the city, and inside the perimeter is Atlanta, basically, and outside it is the suburbs and the Deep South. And within it, it's just as gay a town as you'll ever find. And outside the rest of Georgia, there's all sorts of inequities, large and small. And so that was the context that Holly and I used. Was it's now 29 years into Pride events, and isn't it wonderful that you can hold your girlfriend's hand at a restaurant and not get beat up in Midtown? But if you try that in 3 counties over, forget about it. And got into a lot of issues within Atlanta and within Georgia that illustrated that dichotomy. For instance, the city of Atlanta wanted to offer its employees domestic partner benefits, yet the state insurance commissioner refused to allow them. And we came up with 3 or 4 examples like that push-pull, that yeah, it's great, we've got all this visibility, but yet we're not quite there. And that was in '99, and we got a lot of good response from that, and that came specifically from people letting us know that we had screwed up. And it also came from the Pride Committee folks realizing and listening to us, to what we were telling them that we needed from them: better press releases, better contacts, more information, more context, more communication between us all. So initially, I think both sides kind of maybe didn't do such a great job, and then when our gay readers complained, thankfully we responded appropriately, and so did the Pride organizers. And now, even last year, we had another year of good coverage that I think pleased the community, but also, and more importantly than pleasing the gay community, served our readers. We were able to make it newsworthy. So I just mentioned that as an example, I think, of a lot of things that ultimately worked out from a bad situation.
Just on the, I want to set the record
Oh,
straight here on
please.
just, no, I mean, the AJC does a special section every year, several pages long with photos of the 4th of July run down Peachtree Street, which involves a hell of a lot fewer people. And they do it every year. Every year it's the same, and every year they do a special section. And it leads every local newscast, and one TV station carries it live. So, I mean, I don't think it's a case that it's necessarily nothing big about people walking down Peachtree Street. I think it's like you said, and I said earlier, that you find the new angle is
Right.
the way to go with
That's
getting
what I was
that kind of
getting
story
at.
covered. And you know, the gay press played a role too in that. We
Yeah,
did,
it did.
We did
I'm
a
sorry.
very big story at the time.
I did. I just forgot to mention.
No, that's okay. I mean, we did a. I'm telling this for a reason, not just to toot our horn, probably for both reasons. We did a couple of really big stories, not just about the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The TV stations covered Pride, but did so really poorly. They showed, I would say, non-representative visuals of the weekend, and that is a problem that plagues a lot of Pride festivals. And so we took the opportunity to do a series over several issues of how the local print and broadcast media cover the Atlanta gay community, not just about Pride, but using Pride as the catalyst for it. And every time we ran that story, we would run the names of the editors of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with their emails and their phone numbers, and that's part of our job. And go to your gay press to do that. If you feel like you're getting a raw deal, whether it's intentional or just negligent on behalf of the local mainstream press, use the local gay press to tell the story. I mean, we're going to have our own approach to it, and our story may not come exactly like you want it either, but at the very least, it can help mobilize the local gay community to put pressure on the mainstream outlets to do a better job. And the AJC has done a much better job, and of late has done a much better job just generally of covering the gay community here in Atlanta. And I think out of a negative came a lot of good things, and I don't miss those opportunities. When people are pissed off and you hear people talking about it in the street, use that opportunity to really create change.
Absolutely. And one of the
Yeah,
ways that
you
you
brought
can
that
do
out,
that,
didn't
I'd like to just skip over some of the other stuff. I know y'all can all read. It's in here. You can figure it out. But to move into talking a little bit about message and talking points, and because part of what Jay described and what Chris described happening that did obviously create change wouldn't have happened if folks weren't sure what it was that they wanted. If they weren't sure what their message was, which was cover us more, and cover us differently. And I think the result of what Jay and Chris were talking about was that then Pride and the folks in the community had to go back and say, okay, how can we present a new angle? So they had to go back and do their homework. And with that new angle, they presented some key messages. And they had their folks ready when they were being interviewed, to provide those talking points about what is so special about Pride. It happens every year. 300,000 people. Now, we can debate if that's more important than 35,000 people running in a 4th of July race every year. But the bottom line is we still need to articulate what is so important about those 350,000 people in order to make sure that we're doing our job. Because if the media isn't doing theirs, that's one thing. But if we're not doing ours, that's what we've got to focus on first.
I'd just like to ask the panel a real quick question. My name is Scott Sewell. I'm the Northeast Region Director of Scouting for All. Going back to the scouting issue. And a problem we find with our organization, mainly the board of directors, not us, but both regional directors, is that we send out a lot of press releases. And as you're all aware, there's a lot of cases and a lot of information going on around the country regarding the scouting issue and gays in scouting. And we find ourselves sending out either a media alert, an action alert, or press releases at least once a week to nationwide press things. Is there such a thing as overkill? Are we starting to be ignored by sending out this many press releases? And the second question, just like one word, which is better, fax or email?
Because what I'd like to do is have y'all do a little group thing. If one of y'all can make sure that you're in a group with Scott, and if y'all can craft something, of what it is that you're trying to communicate, and craft that together as something that, from y'all's expertise, you believe will be more effective than something that they've been doing. Would that be okay? And then you can present that to everybody, and it'll be more than. There was another question?
I've been assessing writing news releases that media read almost word for word, but I have found a lot of other people have had trouble
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is what's news, and it's not necessarily a gimmick. There are some cool things, and perhaps
in her stuff. I don't know, and it's probably going to be slightly different for each of the different media. But you're looking at, yeah, conflict is important. A story has to have conflict. It also has to have impact, and it helps if it's local, and if it's specific. A story can also be if you've got a hot person or topic. You know, right now, this, I promise you, this a week ago would have garnered absolutely no attention from anyone, but right now it's what everyone's talking about. What?
Rob, were you going to say something?
So we can, I think what you're getting at is what qualifies as news, and we can talk about that later.
Okay, why don't we just real quickly, for like the next 10 minutes, just from where you are, break into like a group here, a group towards the back where Holly is, and then a group up in the front.
Holly, Scott? Yeah. You want
issue that you're, whether it's an event that you have upcoming, whether it's a scouting issue that you're trying to get coverage for, or just raising awareness about your organization, put together what your key message is about the issue, about the event, the organization, and some basic talking points on that, working with these professionals here. And then we'll have you, do a pitch, and we'll see what that feels like. Okay? If we can do that for like the next 10 minutes, because I want to be respectful of everybody's
no, we're going to go in the back like Cindy said. I
No.
think Barry raised some interesting questions. Is anyone else having
Chris, also.
difficulty understanding these messages?
Oh, they're going to circle around the pros.
Yeah.
So, the other one.
All right.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what Cindy was saying.
Key message. He's having a hard time getting coverage from his
Totally at a loss. I have no training in this whatsoever and missed the vote. But we need to get some more publicity for our group because we want to get the word out to people. We have to find ways of getting them in. Seniors, these are seniors.
We don't actually hear from seniors ever.
Yeah, this is one of the huge things. Imagine gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender senior centers. I mean, there are some things around. So we want to let them know we're here. I don't know how to do it.
We probably had about 50 people or so. It wasn't a lot, but we had a lot of dignitaries and presidents of universities spoke.
Do you want to take that event and see how we would do it? Would that be okay?
People from
in high school journalism, who, what, when, where, how?
I mean, I sent out, I think we called Squibs, we sent out something for their newspaper, local newspapers, calendars, but then I was at loss, I didn't know what to do after that. So what are we talking about now?
Usually,
Kind of.
do you know what seems to work for us, at least, and this is again, what, when, where, why? What, when, I like that. And then maybe do a brief synopsis.
Is this going to be a fax to somebody?
This was a fax to us. It was also a phone call.
We got pressured out of a fraternity. We just did a story about a fraternity at Vanderbilt who pressured out the gay person came out and then basically kicked out of the fraternity. It was the time angle was that at the homecoming parade, one of the gay student float got pelted with rocks and he had to die back. It's just having gone down like today is not that unusual, but it's unusual now because the mainstream press is paying attention to it. I don't think Tennessee would have done that story 10 years ago. But when the Vanderbilt student group came to us with the story, the first thing I asked was, with the homecoming float story, was, give me a person who's got a story. And they gave me an SAE who was
Well, usually it's like this opinion versus the film issue, and this time it was a section. And I wanted to get media coverage over this, and I've been selecting
Those points were our free, artsy type paper, and they were very interested in covering it. And actually, I saw a bunch of public universities. And I gave them.
You can, when you think you're not getting very much, you're getting a lot better than what you think you're getting.